Welcome everyone to the second Asking Different Questions research training series session. This session is on identity and belonging in science. Before I move forward, I'm going to just do a really short poll. I want to know who here was here last week and who this is the first one for. So I just opened a short one question poll. While you're responding, I'll introduce myself. My name's Sarah McCullough. I'm the Associate Director at the Feminist Research Institute, and I'm one of the co-PIs on a grant funded by the NSF that for this program. And thank you. It looks like about a little over 75% of you attended last week, so we have a lot of people coming back, and a lot of some new faces as well. This series is hosted by the Feminist Research Institute, where our goal is to build more just futures through leadership, collaboration, and inquiry. We believe that we work to support research that helps people put their values into action, and asking different questions is really central to this. It is a program that introduces key insights from feminist science and technology studies and critical race theory to STEM research, so that researchers like many of you here can apply this to your own contexts. In each of these sessions, we'll be starting off by going over a foundational concept. Today, I'll provide you with a short introduction. Today I'm going to do something that will seem very unscientific, which is that I'm going to read a short fable. But fables sometimes can, and not in fiction for that matter, can sometimes tell stories that in some ways are more true in terms of how something may feel or what an experience may be than a more quote unquote like objective analysis. So this is a session that is going to be about the experience of who is present in the scientific community, who is in the labs, who is not, and to provide a fairly provocative story to give us another window into how and why that is. This will be followed up by some discussion questions and then some closing polls. So today's foundational concept is intersectionality. This is a term that has become increasingly popular, particularly since it really hit the mainstream in 2015. But it's been around for a long time before that. It was a term originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a legal scholar, and she came up with this term in order to describe a form of discrimination that was not considered viable in the courts of law. She looked at a case where a Black woman was suing for discrimination, but her claim was not considered legally valid because the unique form of discrimination that she was experiencing was not necessarily because she was a woman, as her white female colleagues did not have similar experiences to her, and it was also not the same as her Black male colleagues. And the judge ruled that essentially she would have to sue under either gender or race discrimination. She could not pursue her complaint at the intersection of these two forms of discrimination. And Kimberly Crenshaw, saw the real injustice in this and created an argument as to why we needed to have intersectional understanding of identity and discrimination. So I think there's a couple of things that are important to hold in here, particularly as this term has become more popular. One is that this is a term that was originally applied to the experience of Black women in the world. And I think that continues to matter, and that's a legacy that's important to hold. To that, it has gone from there to gone on from there, and Crenshaw herself has also, used it to think about the other intersections of oppression and identity not just gender and race, but also sexuality, ability, socioeconomic class, migration status, and many others. Uh, but I just want to, remind us to return to this term in its original context, as the dilution in popular media has been a challenge. And and there's some links in the chat if you'd like to read a bit more about that or look at the original paper where she comes up with this term. So today's fable was written by Banu Subramaniam, who is she's a scientist, and she's a scientist turned feminist scientist slash feminist science studies scholar. She was trained and has a PhD in experimental biology. She wrote a first book called Ghosts of Darwin that really unpacks some of the practices that she saw in her field and she was trained in that ultimately were embedded in some fairly problematic histories. And she's gone on to write other books, many articles. And the article that we're going to read today is a fictional account that was written 20 years ago. And but despite being 20 years ago, I've learned as I've shared this with others in the field that it still is sadly relevant, continues to be sadly relevant today, which is why we've made a part of this series. Before we move into this, I want to note that this has been a piece that sometimes hits a really vulnerable place in people, particularly if you have experienced forms of not belonging, exclusion, microaggressions in the research setting. As one person who I shared this with said after reading the full piece, she said it showed her scars that she didn't realize she had. And though I've excised this, I should say that the original piece, if you're looking at that, I should give you a content warning around suicide, though I won't be reading that part of this piece today. What you're going to hear next is an adaptation of the original piece that was adapted by Maya Cruz and Kalindi Vora. So thank you, Kalindi and Maya, for your work on this. So with this, I am going to dive into this adapted reading. If you are looking at the original text, this will be different. So, and I will have the words on the screen so you can read along with me. Snow Brown and the Seven Detergents. Once upon a time, deep within a city in the Orient, lived a young girl called Sletnala. Sneha, as they called her, became fascinated with the world of science and left her beloved home and family to sail across the oceans far away to become a scientist. Sneha approached the building of scientific truth. The floors were polished and gleaming white. It all looked grand and formidable. Sneha was led into the office of the Supreme White Patriarch. The room was full. "Welcome, budding patriarchs," he said. "We are in the department of the pursuit of scientific truth, and we welcome you. But let me be perfectly frank. These are going to be difficult years ahead. This is no place for the weak or the emotional or the fickle. We want fighters here, patriarchs with initiative and genius. Go forth, all ye budding patriarchs, and find scientific truth." Sneha found herself in the middle of the hallway all alone. She was very confused. This is not what she thought it would be like. Sneha began to learn the systems through which she was expected to find scientific truth. First, finding the patronage of an associate patriarch or an assistant patriarch, and taking courses to learn the truths already known and how to find new truths. Sneha was required to check with a special mirror as often as she could to monitor her progress. The mirror was the collective consciousness of all the Supreme White Patriarchs across the land who have decided what it takes to be an ideal scientist. Standing in front of the mirror in the room of judgment, Sneha said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest scientist of them all?" The mirror replied, "Not you, you're losing this game, you with the unpronounceable name." The mirror said she was far too emotional, weak, and pathetic. The mirror did not think Sneha was cut out to be a scientist unless she worked really hard to act like a scientist. The mirror sent Sneha deep into the forest to find the wise matriarch in the house of seven detergents, an exiled member of the department to whom all scientific misfits are sent. Let me show you what you would let me show you what they would like to have you do, the matriarch said to Sneha before leading her to a room with seven jars. The seven detergents that can wash away any part of yourself that you don't want forever. The matriarch cautioned Sneha not to give away her identity, her culture, who she is. But Sneha was excited. She knew she was treated differently because of her differences, her accent, her culture, her name. But, Sneha said, this is truly what I want. Sneha got into the great washing machine with 4 detergents. Rub-a-dub-bub, rub-a-dub-dub. You may come out now, Snow Brown. Good luck, said the matriarch. Now I sound and act like everyone else, Snow Brown said, satisfied. Snow Brown returned to her courses, but the professor still never took her seriously as a scientist, never looking her in the eye or asking for or valuing her opinion. The mirror told her to leave her third world mentalities behind, to act like a scientist. Snow Brown returned to the house of the 7 detergents and used a 5th detergent, an anti-third world detergent. The next day, the Supreme White Patriarch called her in to discuss her progress in finding scientific truth. He was not impressed with her. Snow Brown returned to her work to develop her ideas with the mirror, who reminded her to please the Patriarch to get ahead. Soon, the Snow Brown was talking in classes and aggressively engaging the patriarchs in dialogue. She was supremely happy, and things were finally going her way. Again, Snow Brown stood in front of the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest scientist of them all?" And the mirror replied, "It sure ain't you, Snow Brown. You're still the last one in town." Snow Brown was shocked. Things had been going well. But the mirror explained that Snow Brown was overdoing it, that she should be more humble and more subservient. Snow Brown did not understand. She knew that this would not be valued by the Supreme White Patriarchs. But as the mirror explained, "I advised you like I would advise anyone, but I've been watching how the other patriarchs interact with you. Apparently, their expectations of you are different. You're brown, remember?" Snow Brown was furious. She stormed out and went to the house of the 7 detergents and used the 6th detergent to wash her brownness away. Standing in front of the Department of Scientific Truth, all the patriarchs realized she was a woman, and a beautiful woman at that. They realized she was too pretty to be a scientist, but they agreed she could be a technician. Snow Brown realized the wise matriarch had been right, and it was too late to do anything. She could not be a scientist. How could she have been, when judged by a mirror that wanted to produce clones of the Supreme White Patriarch? Having seen this happen far too much, the wise patriarch said to Snow Brown that it would be important to communicate her experience to others. She said, "You must write down what has happened to you for future generations." So as I said, this is a shorter version of a longer piece that I invite, if this is interesting or compelling to you, to go back and read that, the full piece. And it interestingly has 3 potential endings that I think invite the reader to think about how we can respond to the homogeneity that historically and to some degrees today continues to be pervasive in science. Some of those endings essentially end with acquiescing to the system, and some of those result in a challenge to the system. So at this point, I'm going to offer you all some discussion questions to think about this fable. Um, and as you know, as I've said in in the previous session, some of you will be having discussions after this or with your lab groups or research community. If any of you are interested in doing this and would like a discussion guide, please contact me or put a note in the chat or go onto the FRI website and you can find a link to do so. So the first questions invite us to think about the content of the piece and its context. So first I would invite you to explore this question. Snow Brown and the Seven Detergents was written nearly 20 years ago. Does it still feel relevant to the experience of those historically underrepresented in feminist STEM fields today? How is that a yes? How is that a no? That can give us a sense of what sort of progress you could say we've made over the past 20 years. Two, what do people feel about the order in which aspects of the protagonist were washed away? And in past discussions of this, a question came up of why can't her gender be washed away, or why was that not an option? After this, we invite any groups or on your own individually to reflect on the following questions. What has contributed to your sense of belonging or prevented it? If the latter, how have you still found community? I think this is a really important question for many people in STEM, particularly if they don't see many people like them in the room or coming from their backgrounds. Has your professional setting held you or others around you to different standards or upheld norms different than your own? Next question. What have you had to give up to succeed in your field of expertise? Or what sacrifices do you feel have been implicitly or explicitly asked of you? Another way that I see people talking about this is, what parts of yourself do you have to leave at the door? What may prevent you from bringing your full self into a lab space, into your research community? And why is that? Four, what practices, policies, or other changes could improve belonging in your field? And so if we do think about these experiences where people are judged differently or are not able to bring their full selves into a space, what could change this? I should add that this has implications, of course, for who feels that they belong there, but it also has implications for the types of questions that we ask. I think it's important to to think about sometimes who asked the question and why they're invested in the question may impact how valid of a question it is felt to be. Classic examples of this come out of, say, like the field of medicine, where women have been historically very understudied, and now that is something that is raised in its profile, but that's taken a long time. But I think other topics may or may not be true in your own fields, and invite you to think about that. So I want to leave you with some closing thoughts that I hope that you can reflect on and think about moving from this. The first thought I invite you to reflect on is how the structures of science continue to hold legacies of white supremacy, legacies of colonialism, and legacies of patriarchy. These are things that we often try to and we want to leave behind, but how are they, maybe in subtle or not so subtle ways, continue to be present? Two, recognize that our intersectional identities impact our sense of belonging, that the experience of, say, women, obviously is not universal. I think this can be really important in conversations about STEM because so much of the research and conversations about belonging in STEM tend to focus on women. Women risks becoming this monolith, as if the challenges of all women are the same. And as Kimberly Crenshaw reminds us, this is not the case, that specifically Black women, other women of color, women with disabilities, queer women will have different different experiences, as well as those that may not identify as women, but don't fit within the historical norm of the field. And finally, as a challenge, we ask you to think about, are there research questions in your field that have been deemed less legitimate because of who is asking them? So not necessarily that the question itself is not a good question, but that perhaps who is implicated in that question or who is answering that question, asking that question, may change its potential legitimacy. So I thank you all for joining us for this short exploration into identity and belonging in science. There is obviously a lot more that can be said and talked about on this topic. The point of this series is not necessarily to give you an exhaustive or fully comprehensive review of a topic, but more to offer you a provocation for your own further explorations, either on your own or with your research community. Now, next week's topic will be identifying bias in scientific research. We will be specifically looking at metaphors and language. So not necessarily personal bias, but bias that is literally cemented into our scientific concepts and the language that we use. So I hope you will join us for that. Before you go, I do invite you to do a closing poll, which I am launching now. I appreciate you all doing these polls. They help us to plan for the future and keep bringing you these workshops. So thank you. I'll leave the poll open for a few moments. If you do have any thoughts or want to reach out, you can find us at fri@ucdavis.edu, or you can contact me directly at smcc@ucdavis.edu.